This is a response to DanaGarrett, your video, Dana, called something like "Rights are Fundamental." I think you're addressing a number of different YouTubers in this video, and I think I'm one of them, because you mentioned a couple of you use a few words that I've used in my videos, and you seem to be inferring that you're talking at least partially about me. I do wish you'd come right out and say it, because it'd be far easier to address issues if you just, are really clear about them, and at least about the person you're speaking to. So I'm going to assume that at least part of your video is about me, so I'll try to address just those parts. There's some things which I'm in agreement with you over, some that I'm not, or some really that it's not that I'm not in agreement with you over, I just think you're being a little bit contradictory in what you say. Okay, let me just see if I've made some post-it notes on the wall up here, so I'm going to be looking in a strange direction, but that's what I'm doing. Okay, you're talking about rights being non-negotiable, and if I understand your position, that certain rights, human rights, are non-negotiable, ownership of one's body, and so on, and those come first, and every other issue in relation to human rights, any what I've referred to as complex issues, what other people have referred to in just slightly different terms, which I might have elsewhere called details, which would need to be worked out. Anything else is kind of secondary, and in some ways you seem to be suggesting is either a distraction, or as a sideshow or a side issue, possibly even a strategy that people, I don't know if you're including me in this, but people who want to oppose certain human rights might adopt. It might be a strategy that they adopt as a delaying tactic, or something else, smoke screen perhaps. You seem to be suggesting something like that, and you give a number of different instances in why that might happen. Okay, I mean, there's several things about that. Firstly, you're couching this in terms of legalization of prostitution, the first thing. And as I've mentioned a few of my videos, and I know you know yourself, Dana, prostitution is legal where I live. In the UK, prostitution is legal, and it's legal in lots of parts of Europe, and it is legal in one or two places in the States, and in New Zealand and other places. And so it is legal. You're not talking about depriving people of an existing right. What we are talking about, I think, is either the extension of an existing right, or the some kind of different kinds of protections in support of that right, or the creation of social structures, not necessarily legal, but other kinds of social structures which would help to bolster that right. So in a sense, it's a bit of a it's not entirely useful, I think, to talk about this as if it was a question about legalizing prostitution, at least where I live, certainly, and from my experience. It might be very different where you live, I don't think so, but certainly the video that I've been talking about are coming with my knowledge base, which might be, as I say, might be different to yours. I would certainly argue for, at the very least, the decriminalisation in your country if it isn't already decriminalised, if not the legalisation to at least match the state of legalisation of my own, possibly more so. So that's the first thing. We're not talking about legalisation, or we shouldn't be, because from my perspective it's already legal. If you want to talk about a very particular set of statutes in a very particular country, perhaps the country where you live, then that's a different discussion. That's a detail and part of the complexity, and probably a very useful detail, and I would be really up for a discussion on that. Granting of rights are non-negotiable is what you say. I think it's a little bit of a general issue here, but I couldn't help picking up on that, because I think the granting of rights are negotiable. I think that's what the laws are. We're in a totally anarchic society, or presumably a society that we once lived in, before the formulation of ideas of jurisprudence. Human rights human rights didn't exist. They were non-negotiable. They just existed, and the whole trajectory of jurisprudence, of the putting into place of civics and of kind of social structures to protect people from one another and from their own worst interests, is about negotiating human rights, isn't it? I would have thought. I mean, obviously, I would assume it's obvious that we're all in favour of the maximisation of liberty and the maximisation of freedom. But the freedom for me to swing my fists ends at the point of another person's chin, which I think Prince Kropotkin said. So it's only I wouldn't So it sounds great to say human rights are non-negotiable. It sounds fantastic, and I'm with you in spirit. Other people have said something similar. But the point is, they are negotiable, and what you're talking about, what we should be talking about, is that negotiation. I mean, we can all say human rights are non-negotiable. It's a platitude, really. Okay, let's look what else I've got. Yeah, yes, conflicted. Yeah, as I say, you make this argument, and I guess it's an argument at least partially directed at myself, that that pointing to complexity or pointing to detail or making a request to not treat this as if it's a black and white issue, but to talk about very specific cases with very specific people in very specific situations. And rather than generalise it out and make blanket statements which lose all the detail. My request to work in those details, you're characterising as a kind of smokescreen or a sideshow. And it's a little bit odd, because in some of your videos you seem to be doing the same thing. I'm just going to go back to a video you made called Prostitution and Reluctance. You start that video by saying that you are, as you say, somewhat conflicted on the topic. Somewhat conflicted on the topic of prostitution. Conflict, being conflicted means you're recognising the uncertainty of the situation, or you're recognising the complexity and recognising the details. Now, it might be you've worked out those conflicts yourself, and you've worked out, and you're not conflicted anymore. Fantastic. In which case, a video telling us how you've managed to do that would be fantastic. You also said that a much larger discussion needs to occur. And again, this is the video of prostitution and reluctance. A much larger discussion needs to occur. And the discussion that you're talking about there is an economic discussion. And you seem to be arguing for a broadly Marxist, socialist reworking of society, so that the economic situations that we're all in right now, but for you, seem to lead to some of the lesser aspects, less valuable aspects of the sex industry. You seem to say that those things, that discussion needs to take place. And again, I would agree. That needs to take place. But isn't that a detail? Isn't that a complexity? Aren't you saying there, when you say a larger discussion needs to take place, that needs to happen? In another video of yours about the Swedish model, you reiterate that, talking about how this larger discussion needs to take place. And again, you're framing it in terms of an economic model. In fact, what you start to come off there in that video, Dana, is you start to come off a little bit like a lot of Marxists I used to know, and socialists and communists when I used to live in Newcastle. Usually, men. And at that time, if you were a hardcore Marxist, particularly a hardcore Marxist male, you didn't have any truck with feminism, because feminism was a side issue. And I'm not talking about radical feminism, I'm talking about basic equality feminism. You didn't have any truck with that nonsense, if you're a Marxist, because you need to get society straight first. You need to get the means of production in the hands of the workers. You need to get an fair distribution of wealth. And once you've done that, then you could deal with the details, like getting women out of the kitchen and allowing them equal access to employment. That was the language of early Marxism, which you may be familiar with. And it sounds a little bit like you're saying something very similar there. You know what I mean? If you're saying a much larger discussion needs to take place, which is what you do say, which ultimately will sort out the problems you're recognising and which are giving you conflicts, presumably in relation to prostitution, then aren't you doing the same thing? Aren't you also pointing to a complexity? In fact, aren't you pointing to a complexity with even greater vigour than I have? Because you seem to be saying we don't need to sort the prostitution issue out. We don't need to talk about prostitution. We don't need to talk about detailed legislation and detailed human rights violations, or we don't need to talk about any of that, because we need to get the economics sorted out. And if you're doing that, then I would suggest there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on in what you're saying about other people, which may include me. I think it's really interesting in the video, the Swedish model, which, as I say, you again talk about the economic base for these problems. You give great praise for Terry Strange and Antique Lens, and recommend that people go to their channel, which is very interesting, because of course Terry Strange, or Nuclear Night, and Antique Lens are amongst the most vigorous and well-informed opposition to the position you seem to be holding now. So I'm a little confused there. I mean, maybe it was this kind of snarky way to say, go and look at these people and laugh at them. I don't think so. I don't think that you're that kind of a guy. But it's an odd recommendation, given what you're saying now. Yeah, yeah. Again, within that one, you say it's about economic necessity and not to make it an issue about permissibility. You actually say we should not make it an issue about permissibility in that video. Not make it an issue about permissibility. Focus on the economics, you say. Well, that seems to me like a bit of a diversion, a bit of a sideshow. Alright, there's a whole bunch of other stuff I can't go through here, but I'll maybe think about it again some other time. But one of the things I find a little bit disquieting about not just your video, Dana, but a number of these videos, is the amount of discounting that's going on. I mean, in your video, you're basically sneering at me and referring to postmodernism, which I have no contact with in any of the videos, because I use words like closure. And you make comments like tacit. I think you say something about a person's tacit beliefs as if you know what my beliefs are. And I've seen that from other users. It's a really underhand tactic. You're trying to undermine people's views by making assumptions about their psychology or their beliefs, and it's not good.